Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Well, hello, and thanks for joining us today on the Green Stream. And today's guests have so much to share with us. They're truly accomplished at what they do and are involved in practically every major project, it seems, in our region. So we have with us today, I'm just really thrilled, Janet Attarian, who is Senior Principal and Senior Mobility Strategist at SmithGroup, and Dan Kinkead, Senior Principal and Director of Urban Design at SmithGroup. And our topics are going to be pretty wide-ranging today, but I'd first like to, if the two of you are okay with it, you have had such interesting careers and continue to make your mark in so many major ways. Could you just talk a little bit about your backgrounds and accomplishments? And let me just say for our listeners, if you somehow missed the recent ranking at Crain's Detroit Business, SmithGroup is the largest and an international architecture, engineering, and planning firm that's based right here in Detroit. But their reach is extensive, and every major project that I can think of, from the Joe Louis Greenway to the Bedrock East Riverfront, Ford City, Detroit Future City Strategy Framework, many climate action plans, and in municipalities, you're kind of doing it all. So Janet, let's start with you. Tell us about your background and how you came to do this work.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed architect, so that is my training. But I sort of definitely took it in a little bit of a different direction after having my own practice for a little bit and sort of practicing more traditional architecture. I always had an interest in cities. I love cities. I love the problem of cities and how cities come together. And I ended up working for the city of Chicago for 20 years as the Complete Streets Director, and really got to dive into helping to make Chicago during sort of a pivotal time, through the late 90s, all the way up until, almost 2016 when I left. And it was a great experience there, really diving into the public realm. I worked for the Chicago Department of Transportation, which is a great organization that really does a lot of projects you might not think of a DOT. So worked on things like the River Walk, worked on Millennium Park, led the 606, a Navy Pier flyover, in addition to all the streetscapes and bike lanes and good stuff. So it was a wonderful experience. And then came actually to Detroit to be the deputy director of planning. After the bankruptcy, and the planning department was one of the departments that was sort of eliminated essentially, and needed to be completely restructured. And I came and helped Maurice Cox reconstruct that department and hopefully build a lot of new trust with Detroit citizens who hadn't really seen planning for a long time. And kicked off all the neighborhood planning efforts and helped create a complete streets program for the city of Detroit. Worked on the Gordie Howe and many other things. And then I've had the great privilege of transitioning back into the private sector here at SmithGroup, and couldn't think of a better place here in Detroit. SmithGroup's been here, right? 1853, Dan?
Yeah, I think so.
1853 is SmithGroup has been continuously in Detroit, which is an amazing history, and it's been great. And I help lead our national mobility practice here in SmithGroup, and work a lot here, but also across the whole country. And one of my big projects right now is leading all the planning and technical support for high-speed rail out in California. And also doing things like greenways, not only here in Detroit, but in other places like Chicago and St. Louis and other things. So that's a little bit about me.
More than a little bit about you. That's amazing. So Dan, can you top that?
I don't
Hope
think
you
so.
can.
I don't think so. I would just I would just say that you know, it's a real pleasure for me to do what I do every day. It's a line of work that I just can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, my background is an architect and urban designer, originally from Detroit, and spent the majority of my younger life trying to leave it desperately, only to be really compelled to come back to it and to work with the folks here and to really reinvest myself and everything else into the city, and have had an opportunity to do that in a lot of ways, including you know, one of the more kind of seminal projects for me was the Detroit Future City Strategic Framework, which you know, we developed, and I led the technical team on that. It was a monster document, but it was a really substantially watershed moment for our city, you know, going through the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history, and then using this tool to guide our way out of it, and collaborate with the city administration, of which, you know, Janet was part at one point, with other leadership. And so to see all of that kind of intertwine and come back to help push us forward is really, really exciting and very satisfying, especially, you know, when you have kids here. We live in the city, we have 3 kids. We know that this matters for a host of reasons, and not necessarily ourselves, but the people that are to come behind us. So for us, it's a really important thing. And the last thing I'd say too is that, you know, as time has gone on, and we've been able to see how the city is driving its own resurgence, and that we as architects and planners and landscape architects and so forth can really contribute to that, and to do it in a way that consistently fosters insight from community voices to help shape this in a really equitable way. This is really, really key for the work that we do, the work that Janet leads and I lead and many of the other folks in our firm. It is deeply tied to that work.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'm hoping that as we talk about some of the specific initiatives, we can be sure to highlight the ways that community involvement and equity are just at the center.
Yeah.
Because we all know that, I think that lots of times urban planning and urban design has the perception that it's only for the elite, or just for the business community. And clearly your work has been turned that upside down, you know, and just really emphasize the importance of community being at the center of everything. So I really hope we can talk a little bit about that. But let's start, if we can, sort of talking about the intersection of sustainability, mobility or transportation, which is what we're known for here in Southeast Michigan, and urban design. Is that something you who wants to start?
That us?
Shoot, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I think, you know, building on what Dan said, Detroit is such an amazing place for so many reasons, and not the least of which is that it's very grassroots, right? There's a lot of people here who, you know, look around and say, I see a need, and they start working on it, right? And so, you know, there's a really interesting intersection, I think, around the topic of sort of mobility and sort of Detroit and community, and then sustainability, right? For the long time, right, we're known as the Motor City. We still are known as the Motor City, for a lot of obvious reasons. But I do think that Detroiters understand intuitively that they do need additional modes of transportation, right? And they need options, and they need choices. You know, somewhere between 21 and 25% of Detroiters don't even have access to a car at all. And then, you know, a much higher, about another 10% just don't have reliable access to a car. So there's a lot of folks that just don't have access to a car. We have a tremendous senior population here in Detroit that are amazing folks, but they're not, you know, necessarily concentrated in dense walkable areas. They're living still in the homes they've lived in all their lives, scattered throughout the city, often in very now low density areas, right, that are not necessarily close to transit, and getting them to their doctor's appointments, or, you know, getting them to the grocery store. These are not necessarily easy things to do. If you, you know, don't feel comfortable driving all the time, or don't have access to a car on a regular basis, or are relying on others to get you maybe to your doctor's appointment. So, you know, and Detroiters intuitively understand these things, right? You don't have to talk to them very long before they're like, yeah, you know, why can't we have something like we see maybe in other cities, right? And have options, and feel like we have safe places to walk, and all that kind of good stuff. So, um, you know, I think when this transition I think we're trying to make between from the motor city to the mobility city, right? You know, and everybody uses those terms, but this idea of how do we combine some of the technology that the car companies are producing and others, with just good active transportation, giving people a chance to walk safely, bike safely, you know, take public transit. Every transit rider is a pedestrian, you know, and reduce, quite frankly, some of the fatalities. You know, again, one of the things you hear the most when you talk to Detroiters, no matter what you're talking to them about, is, you know, we don't want people speeding through our neighborhoods. We're tired of the crashes and the accidents, and you know, not feeling comfortable having our children be able to play out front, because of the, you know, the way people drive. You know, and so there's been a lot of efforts lately, to really change that, dynamic, right? From Detroit creating the Complete Streets program, to even just the speed hump program, you know, to, you know, really focusing on putting in the kinds of the slow street program, which is part of the Streets for People plan that the city put out, right? These are all efforts to sort of calm that traffic. You know, think about things like what we did up in Livernois in the Avenue of Fashion, right? And really reducing that street down to a 3-lane cross section, and widening out those sidewalks, so that we could really focus on pedestrian and bicyclists, and slow the cars down, and look at what's happening economically up there, and all the shops that are opening up, right? So this intersection between, you know, to me, by definition, good mobility is sustainable, because that people need to be able to move around and have good choices. And when they do, you give them more sustainable choices, right? Driving everywhere, especially with single occupancy, is not a sustainable option, even with electric cars. And let's face it, it'll be a long time before all of Detroit owns an electric car. They're, you know, they're expensive. And you know, there's obviously lots of issues around affordability, and still insurance issues and other things that, you know, just make owning a car expensive here. So we've got to really give people a choice, and choice is going to just give people a more robust, sustainable life, I think, and health. You know, it's also very tied to the health issue. We have a lot of issues with, you know, asthma and diabetes, and heart issues, and these things often need better active transportation to help address them. If people get out and move, they exercise, again, feel comfortable walking around their neighborhood, maybe walking to a grocery store, these kind of things can change those outcomes too. So I think it's intricately linked to both Detroit's history and hopefully its future.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback a little bit on what Janet was saying. You know, she cited Livernois as an example, and the work that was done there. I mean, it really does come down to those kind of physical improvements, and they are transformational. My wife and our 3 kids, we live in Detroit. We live right near the Livernois corridor, and it was a real change, and really welcomed. And I think it showed a lot of Detroiters, at least in that part of the city, what's possible when you make those types of priorities. and those types of investments. And I can recall, you know, when my wife and I moved back, we were originally from Detroit, but we moved to New York, of course, for a while, and then couldn't wait to come back to really contribute to our city. That was a real big focus. When we came back, there was some substantial challenges, you know, including going through, you know, significant municipal bankruptcy and so forth. But in the process of that, I think we recognize the kind of intrepid nature, durability of the residents of the city. And as they kind of advanced things and we contributed with them, it was a galvanizing effect. And I think much of what we see now is interwoven with that kind of passion to save our city, and then to make it as best as it possibly can be for as many people as possible.
Yeah. You know, I just have to share, some of our listeners know that a little while ago I did a half gainer with a double twist and broke an arm. And I was actually talking with Justine Johnson about this on a podcast, and she brought it up. I didn't intend to make it part of the conversation, but we did. But it's amazing how when you've had the privilege of having a vehicle and of being able-bodied your entire life, when you suddenly no longer have that, how immediately you see the world through a different lens. And it's really a gift that I think makes you able to better appreciate the importance of the work that you're doing, and how small things, seemingly small things, can make a very big difference in how people have access to the mobility that they need. So it's really great to hear some of the practical examples, because sometimes this all sounds so theoretical, you know, and so it's like, what does that really mean to me as a person in this, you know, in the environment, you know, what does that mean? So it's great that you're focused on that and doing that work. Another one of those areas where I think some practical examples can be helpful is the whole concept of adaptive reuse. You know, I was really excited to see the you know, some of the community resilience toolkits and other things that you've worked on. But how are we going to achieve this goal of creating adaptive reuse opportunities in Southeast Michigan?
That's a very good question. I would say that there is at least increasing recognition and appreciation for the built context that we have today, and that what we had seen in the past as an environment in which, you know, the old things needed to go away and the new things were going to come in and they would be fantastic. I think many people recognize that that was a little bit of a fool's errand, and in fact, along the way, we lost a great deal of our identity in that work. And you can see it in a lot of parts of the city, and things that Janet was highlighting earlier, along key corridors, places that are really thriving. They have that historic context within them, right? The characteristics of the buildings and streets, even the lampposts and other things. I mean, they provide a space for people that feels comfortable and identifiable, and I think that does matter. And it isn't just a kind of historic preservation or kind of nostalgia thing. This is just who we are. This is the place, and we don't put up new things and throw old things away immediately. We adapt what we have. And I think to your point on adaptive reuse, it's a really big area of focus for us within SmithGroup overall, and particularly within our urban design market. We are working in urban markets, in cities, which means in most cases, there's stuff already there, right? There's things that have been built, whether those are buildings or park spaces or infrastructure, they are there. And I think from my perspective, when I look at it, there's a kind of triple bottom line facet to this overall. I mean, first of all, you know, the adaptive reuse itself, the projects that are part of that work to really reutilize the materials in a way, excuse me, that actually saves cost. Undeniably. And if you work through that correctly, you're going to come out ahead, and you're going to also end up reinvesting in folks locally within trades and so forth that have that expertise, and it buoys them up. At the same time, though, when you do that, you are also saving the structure itself and all of the embodied carbon. And so in many cases, when you are adaptively reutilizing a building, you are maintaining 50 to 75% of the embodied carbon that's in that structure. When you knock it down or blow it up or whatever, it all goes up, and that's it. We lost it. And those are the things that people overlook. A lot of times we're really focused on the kind of operational sides of carbon, but the embodied carbon is huge. The last thing I would say on this too is from a kind of social perspective, the ability to have those spaces, places, buildings that have an intrinsic identity that people can connect with, right? That have historically been present. They mark the place where one's mother was, proposed to, or where something else very special happened. Those aren't just kind of flighted little stories. Those are really the kind of meaningful points of life. And our historic structures and streets and spaces help to define that. And I think more people are becoming aware of that and that kind of the social cohesion that those places provide.
So, Dan, you talked about triple bottom line. So maybe we could talk a little bit about another thing that I think is often the elephant in the room. And that is, what are the opportunities for economic growth when working for sustainably designed urban systems? I think sometimes people have in their heads that it's an either or, and that there are reduced opportunities for people when we focus on those things. But I think you have a different way of thinking about it. So what words do you have for us on that?
Well, I would start up, and I know that Janet can jump in on this too. I think, when we think holistically about our cities and our regions and how they grow and thrive and how people have high quality of life within them, I think for us, we also understand that at the heart of that is well-functioning infrastructure that supports what people want to accomplish, right? In many ways, that's the fuel that we utilize. And if we start to think through things like mobility networks that I think Janet will speak to, as well as other things like telecommunications and the ability to deploy things like mesh networks in communities. In fact, our firm actually created a prototype for a deployable mesh network system that you could put in neighborhoods to provide the telecommunications that you couldn't otherwise get. This was a while back. By that, I mean 7 or 8 years ago. And it was transformational for people. You could deploy this rapidly. And you now see things like that in other places where they're recovering from a horrific kind of weather event or something like that. But the broader way of thinking about the economic growth here too means that we are conscious of the needs of everyone within the community, right? And that this isn't about a number of kind of folks that are leading major industry that are going to strive to do a bunch of things, and then there'll be a trickle-down effect of things that come and support other people. We all need to have a meaningful part of this. We all have something to share and contribute to it. And if anything we've learned in Detroit, it's that people with those skills, those like literal like handcrafted skills, they can do amazing things. And so everybody across that labor spectrum has the ability to jump in and be part of it. And I think that the historically lower cost to entry for some of the things on the kind of trade side helps us to bring more people in. And you can see it now, the craftsmanship and a lot of things that are done here and the way that's kind of brought out broadly. You can really feel it in the work that we're part of. So
yeah, I mean, in the end, all the work we do is really about the economic development, right? I mean, what you're trying to do is improve people's quality of life, right? And so a lot of that has to do with that economic sort of engine, right? And can you do that in a way that promotes healthy and sustainable living, right? At the same time, right? And that's that triple bottom line, right? And I think that's always what we're going for and working for. But it starts actually by defining what that means to the people who are there. So often it gets a bad reputation because people assume when you mean economic development, you mean economic development for other people. The economic development means you'll get other people coming in and getting that wealth, not the people who live there today. Now, does Detroit want to grow? Yes, we do. We want to grow. And so we do want other people too. But that's not where we start. Where we start with is who's living there now and what do they need from an economic, from a health, from a livability, from a, what do they need to thrive, right? And what do we make sure that we do so that they continue to thrive and they can continue to thrive in place? I don't like to use the word gentrification with Detroit. I think it's a really misleading term here. And people have so many different even ideas and of what that word even means. We have plenty of space and plenty of opportunity for housing here. So, again, but it doesn't mean that people can't, be displaced from different areas or not feel as maybe culturally comfortable in neighborhoods that they have been in. And so, when we did the Joe Louis, for instance, right? I mean, it just starts with listening. Always, every project we do in urban design, I mean, it's just where we start. You start with listening. You don't come in with a defined answer, definitely, and you don't even necessarily come in with a defined problem, right? You come in and you say, okay, we want to do this thing. What might this mean to you? I mean, you can imagine, I mean, I do urban trails all over the country. I'm doing it in Chicago and Milwaukee and St. Louis and, Detroit. And often it's not what the community has on the top of their priority list, right? They're not like, we're just waiting for a trail, Greenway, depending on what you want to call it. So you go in there and you say, hey, we want to do this thing. Here's some of the reasons we want to do this thing, because there is actually this thing called trail-oriented development, which has been, very successful in many places around the country. It gets to that healthy transportation. It can connect people to, mobility hubs where they can get buses or bike share, or, combination of these other things. It can raise property values, which is something we want to see in Detroit, right? We want homeowners to begin to get some generational wealth here. It can do a lot of that kind of thing, but but we didn't say, hey, we're coming in and we want to do a trail. Isn't that great? We said, we want to do this thing. It's a trail. We think we have this amazing opportunity. What is it that you need?
Yeah.
And we heard all sorts of other things, of course, right? We're concerned about dumping, we need economic development. We need a safe place. We need a place to go shopping. We need a playground for our kids, any number of things that had, we need housing stabilization. We need money to fix up our porch that's falling down, right? Like these are the things you hear when you talk to Detroiters, right? So then you figure out how you can take this project, and one project can't solve everything, but how can this project leverage as many of those things? What other resources can you bring to the community? Which already might be in place to address some of those things, right? So that you're wrapping it around, and then you create those partnerships so that you're lifting up everyone together when you're doing the project, right? And so that's where you go from not just engagement and not even just equity, but to empowerment. And empowerment is the thing I think that underlies economic success, actually, in the end. And that's the sort of connection we're always trying to make on these types of projects.
And I want to piggyback really quickly on one of the things that Janet was mentioning, and it's the kind of the growth and improvement, say, around one's property and their opportunities and so forth, right? Where you're actually, it's a good thing, right? And I think, Janet was reinforcing that. I cannot agree more. And what often happens in some of these conversations, particularly in Detroit, is there'll be a comment that'll come in and say, well, wait a minute, but if we keep improving and increasing and growing, my taxes are just going to go through the roof, right? And that's usually, and it's because people are legitimately frightened by that. That there are important things in here that we want more people to know about. For instance, in the city of Detroit, for a homestead, there's something called the Headley Amendment, and it caps your overall tax growth on that property by 2% per year. And so one of the things we try to talk about with people is, look, if you are as a Detroiter, you're the owner of this home, you are going to benefit a lot from it. You're not going to pay more taxes, but you're going to be able to get an equity line out to replace that roof on it. And so the improvements that we're talking about here are then the contributors to that value, then leads to the opportunity to have that improvement. This is a virtuous cycle that we're describing here, not vicious. And it can do a lot of good, and we just need to see even more of it and guide the policy and the regulatory tools around it.
Right.
Well, you're clearly onto something, because I think the Joe Louis Greenway project has really become a national or international model.
Yeah.
Right? Aren't we getting calls from other places about how did you do it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've brought folks from Milwaukee and folks from St. Louis and folks from Chicago to come and see the Joe Louis. We've organized a number of tours, and I'm sure there's others that I'm not listing right now, but those are tours that I particularly have been involved with. So no, it's definitely, seen as a great example. And
I know Janet, she probably won't say it, but she's had the opportunity to connect with a lot of people across the country on this stuff and share the work that she's leading and that others like Brian Charlton and others in our firm are doing. And in the end, I mean, people are seeing just how, to your point, Terry, how transformational these projects can be. And in the process that we lead, and I know this is something that Janet and our whole team does, these aren't just ideas that we just deploy like, hey, we think you're going to love this Greenway. It's fostered through years of community engagement, right? And so when it comes out, people can see themselves in that project. They can see it in the work. And that is really, really powerful for people. And I think it's why one of the big reasons, I guess, why we do what we do.
Yeah. People don't want things done to them. They want to have the opportunity to shape, what happens. And it sounds like you've got a secret sauce for facilitating that dialogue, so that you can get there. So thank you for your leadership and work in that. Another topic that I'd like to hear your perspective on is one that so many different entities have worked on, sometimes in fits and starts, but talk a little bit about stormwater management. I know it doesn't sound like a particularly interesting topic until you're dealing with floods, and then suddenly it's sort of front and center. But I know that resiliency has been absolutely central to the firm's work. And you've got some things you're doing in some communities with concrete and pavers to create a durable design that helps with that stormwater. So tell us a little bit about what you're up to on that front.
Let me dive into that. Yeah, this is a topic I've actually been working on for a long time in my career. I created the Sustainable Streets program in Chicago and did all the Green Alley program in Chicago and all that kind of stuff. So I've been working on this for a long time in my work in Chicago, and then of course bringing it here for my work in Detroit. Detroit's an interesting conversation around the stormwater piece. In one way, the fact that we have lost a lot of structures and have a lot of vacancy, the city has naturally become more absorbent, if you will, right? So from a regulatory perspective, there's like these requirements we have to meet. In a sort of ironic twist of fate, the vacancy has led to us being able to meet that a lot of the time because we just have a lot of now open fields, which are much better at holding that stormwater versus hard surfaces that run off and then cause a lot of the problems. That being said, though, we also have a pretty old and legacy sort of storm system that has a number of weak points. We do have LaRouge and other places where we have natural waterways. We even have the riverfront and issues there, right? So certain neighborhoods definitely just see flooding from when water levels were really high on the Great Lakes system. So we have a number of sort of different kinds of issues. Obviously one of the biggest problems though is just when it rains a lot, people's basements flood. Right. And when people's basement floods, it's a health issue for people. It's a huge economic burden for people, not only just to clean it up, but it devalues the value of their homes. So their ability, again, to sell over time or to gain wealth from ownership is largely impacted. And, there's certainly certain areas of the city where there's much more, sort of the Lower East Side, kind of, if you will, has a lot of issues, because essentially the highway fills up the stormwater system, and then everything south of that, there's no room for water to get in. It's a little bit of an oversimplification, but it has, and then of course everything used to flow out to the river, and to keep things cleaner we diverted that, but that means the pipes now are undersized. So there's a lot of work actually happening right now, to talk about how it links to mobility. We wanted to do some major improvements to Jefferson, oh gosh, almost 8 years ago now. And what we realized very quickly was there was a lot of utility work that needed to be done under Jefferson to address stormwater issues, and that we needed to get that done before we did any sort of mobility and roadway improvements. So we did some temporary stuff with the bike lanes, put some bike lanes in just to help slow down the road and right size that road, because it was it's 9 lanes of traffic.
Yeah.
Um, But, as anybody who happens to be driving up and down Jefferson these days, or riding a bike or walking, it's been under construction for one utility or the other for several years now. And that's trying to get all that work done. And it's not only stormwater work and water work, but there's definitely a lot of that done. But I think from a neighborhood planning and an equity planning perspective, we really looked at this when we were in the planning department, and when we were looking at neighborhood plans, and especially when we were looking at communities that really are effective, and how can we create sort of districts, if you will, where we could take the neighborhoods off of the sewer systems, give them separated systems so that the stormwater had its own path, because then you can bring it to the river or to the lake, because it's going to be much cleaner. Just divert first flush or something like that. How can we create distributed systems like, permeable pavements and rain gardens, incorporate them? And there have been a number of pilot projects and great foundations and non-for-profits who have really put a lot of work into this in the city. It ties back to the Detroit Future City. There are a number of really great organizations in Detroit who have worked so hard on these kinds of issues, and integrating them also with renewables energy and resiliency hubs, and just making Detroit's communities more resilient, because that's going to help people live more sustainable and healthy lives, right? That's really what it's about. And it even ties into the farming that that Detroit is, so famous for too, right? All these things become interconnected. So I think there's been a lot of what I would call smaller efforts, and we're trying to slowly build to some larger efforts. When we were doing the Gordie Howe and the new plaza coming in, trying to get that whole new set of hard spaces diverted so that that water actually could go right to the river and never hit the stormwater was something that we worked on. So that's like a big lots and lots of gallons, right? Just diverting it. East Riverfront, this is a place where really can we take the whole East Riverfront offline, south of Jefferson, which would help a lot of different things, and create sort of the ability for new development to not necessarily have to each parcel have to meet its stormwater requirements, but that the district as a whole meets those stormwater requirements. Though that's an idea that has been floating around, and that we're continuing to try to make happen and push forward and see how that could happen. The reconstruction of the 94, again, doing some improvements there so that hopefully it doesn't have such a big impact. And I-375, same thing. These things have major stormwater components to help hopefully alleviate some of these problems.
Mhm. And I would add to the real, one of the additional really important points that I think Janet is raising here is that we unlike many other cities are blessed with a really plentiful land portfolio, right? We have just got a lot of available land, and we can put that land to work and can help to manage stormwater overall. And if you think about what we're seeing right now from a climate side, that we're going to have more severe, more substantial rains more often that will trigger flooding, particularly the flooding that would trigger the CSOs that Janet was speaking to. We have the ability to do something many other cities simply do not, where we can use our land area to manage that and not trigger CSOs, but manage it on site. And I think that's exciting for a lot of people, and it's a great way to reintegrate those natural systems into our city. There are existing topographies that are present to support it too. So,
Yeah. I mean, just planting trees on some of that vacant land, really increases the ability of that land to absorb stormwater. So relatively speaking, we can do some pretty easy fixes compared to places that are pretty much all hardscape, which is why, like in Chicago, we had to do a lot of permeable pavements because we just had a lot more hardscape.
It's funny, SBND is focusing on tree canopy as well as the whole water picture. Those are two big things, but it's very hopeful to hear what you have to say about, because my question about stormwater infrastructure and green stormwater infrastructure is scalability, right? Are we ever going to get to a point where there's enough to really have a noticeable impact? And so it sounds like you're very hopeful that you're seeing some of the links between some of the smaller but brilliant at work that different organizations are doing in the city, along with sort of the bigger plan of how can we move the big boulders too.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So, we've talked about a couple of different areas, and I want to ask you, what do you see as the biggest future challenge to overcome in terms of sustainable urban design? What keeps you up at night? What do you see as the biggest challenge that we're going to face?
Well, it's not because there aren't many challenges to think of. There are many, and so trying to think of the most significant is tricky. I mean, I would say one of them that stands out for me is kind of two facets to it. It's about affordability. And it's also about kind of experience, and in some cases, trauma overall. And I think the ability to provide an environment where people can really thrive and grow and do a lot of things and feel very comfortable in our city and advance their families and so forth. I mean, it just takes a lot to do that. And the ability to foster the support for families to get there, I think is important. And making sure that I think more folks have the opportunity to own their own home, to develop long-term multi-generational wealth is paramount. In many cities like Detroit, we simply do not have that. It's a real big struggle, but the ability to build that wealth over time has manifold positive impacts on the succession of future generations to go. And that is one of the ways that we work out and we root out injustice, and we begin to push out all the other kind of prevailing things that provide headwinds against many Detroiters. And I think the last thing I'll say on that topic is that, you know, in doing that too, you immediately start to see how younger kids and so forth see in their parents or in their extended family an excitement, a hope, a range of outcomes that maybe in the past no one had really thought were possible. That is infectious, and that helps to really spread, I think, a much more positive sense of where we can go, and it actually adds to people's health overall.
Yeah. You know, I remember, I know there's a lot of things we could probably say about the queue line, but I remember in those first weeks when it opened up and riding it and just listening to Detroiters, and it's everything I believe of public transit. I think public transit is just this very amazing communal experience that forces us to interact with each other in a way that creates community, but people were so proud. They were so proud of it. I mean, Detroiters, they were bringing people, they were showing it off. They were so proud. Now, you know, it only goes so much. I often call, just I say about Detroit is we build transportation projects. We don't build transportation systems. That's our problem, because a project can only do so much. You have to create networks, right? And networks are by default usually sustainable, right? That's the resiliency that you have to build. So when I think about our greatest challenge, I mean, obviously there's a lot of them. I'm in that mobility space, but transportation is a huge impact to our carbon footprint. It's a huge impact to the way we live and the patterns that we have and the choices and options we have. It has a huge impact on health, not only because if we don't have access to active transportation options, there's that impact, but literally we're killing people with cars. Pedestrian fatalities are way up. Detroit is still one of the most dangerous cities in the country. Vehicle fatalities, you know, you see a tremendous amount of aggressive driving. I mean, every day in Detroit, unfortunately, I stop at red lights and there are people who drive around me right through the red lights, right? I mean, you know, these things tend to lead to, unfortunately, people getting killed. And, you know, you know, my goal is 0 fatalities, right? On our streets. You know, they affect children and their ability to walk to school, you know, or ride a bike to school, right? These things have profound influences on people. You know, twice Detroit had money to build a subway system and failed to do so. These things have huge long-term economic impacts, and our ability to attract jobs, right, to Detroit and a diverse economy, which I think is absolutely critical to Detroit's success. You know, employers are looking for those things. Employers want to see bike lanes and trails and other choices so that they know a wide range of employees can get to them and get to them on time, right? So a public transportation system where half the time your employees are going to be late because it's not reliable is not a good thing for business, right? So having robust mobility and robust mobility choices, it's not just optional to me, it's a right that Detroiters deserve. And it's something I think that, you know, we're working on. It's getting better. But we've got a long way also to go. And you know, how to really make that happen. And really support those things. And but there are some things we could do right away, right? Well, first of all, there are great things that are being done. There's been a lot of focus, you know, with smart with the fast buses, the top 10 rides for the DDOT lines and trying to increase frequency and reliability on those lines. You know, we've done great partnerships, especially COVID led to a lot of innovation, right? So like you could get free Lyft or reduced Lyft rides from your bus stop after hours for any of the top 10 rides. There was a shuttle service that connected all the healthcare facilities and also went to some of the, you know, again, the low density makes transit hard in Detroit. So there's whole sections. You got to get people that first mile, last mile, right, to the main trunk lines, which is one of the things Joe Lewis does really wonderfully. Ride your bike to the mobility hub, to the major transit line, you know, have a safe place to park it, or better yet, just grab a bike share and do it. So you don't even need to have your own bike, you know, or take a walk, or maybe your scooter, or, you know, whatever, right? You know, these things economic mobility. The other thing too is trains. We do have Amtrak connection. The Detroit-Chicago Amtrak train is one of the busiest trains outside the Eastern Seaboard in the whole country. It's very well used. We could eventually connect back to Toronto, right? The tunnel is still there. We've renovated Michigan Central. Connecting Detroit to Toronto via train, that would make a big difference. Improving the speed of this train. We know the improvements on the track that need to be made between Ann Arbor and Detroit that would greatly decrease the amount of time it takes and improve the reliability of those trains. If we improve the Amtrak station and do those improvements, Amtrak said that they would be very open to increasing the number of trains, and we could get commuter trains between Ann Arbor and Detroit and even the airport potentially. These things, we know what they are. We know how to do them. We have price estimates for them. We just gotta do it. We gotta make it happen.
And Jen is right on. And I would say, the virtuous cycle that she's describing is one that we've sought after for so long, but we're unable to reach it. But in one just brief moment of reflection on this too, in the shadow of that virtuous cycle is also the vicious cycle. And I look back on, the moment in the 1970s when we had a real opportunity to make substantial transit network investments here, and at a regional level that completely collapsed.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things where you're in your current situation, but you snap your fingers. Imagine what could have triggered across the region if we would have had those systems in place, right? How many, freeways maybe we have avoided, how many neighborhoods would we have maintained, how many opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And I think for many people, they probably don't even know that we had a chance to have a regional rail network for passenger travel. And I think I really want people to know that, though, and for us to a certain degree be haunted by it, so we don't let that happen again, that we build on it and we realize the things that Janet's talking about. Of course, we're chasing behind ourselves to get there, but we can do it, and we should do it recognizing that when things don't come together, we end up realizing infrastructure like the people mover that, does not realize the objective that was originally put out there, right? And we have to really be steadfast on that and really urge our elected officials, business leaders, everyone to make that possible. And it's not for us on this call, it's for our kids and our kids' kids. And that, that's pretty motivating.
Well, one of my big things is, how do we create the vision of what's possible so that it's a broadly held vision? It's not just the vision of a few leaders. When you have the ability to travel or live in other places that have that infrastructure, and you start to understand what that really means, and how it transforms your experience as just a person living and working someplace. It transforms how you go about your life, and it makes it just that contrast. And it's not necessarily that one thing is good or bad, it's just different. And as long as we're aware of those possibilities, I think we can make good choices, right? I don't find it helpful to sort of label one thing as good or bad, right? It's just imagine what this could be, and then decide.
It's really about choice. It's not about good or bad. It's about choice.
Yeah.
You want people to be able to have choices about the way they move around. Cars are not going to go away. That's not what this is about. It's about creating a diversity of choices to meet, like you said, you talked about when you had your arm broken, right? So that, no matter where you are in the spectrum, no matter what you have, have to do that day, that you have some meaningful choices in the way that you move around. And it does have also to do with sustainability. We are not going to meet our stated goals as a country, as a state, even as a city around carbon if we do not change the way we move. I mean, it is fundamental. There is not a sustainability plan out there that does not acknowledge that that is a huge factor. Now, again, continuing to give people choice, it's a process. There are many ways to get there, but if we continue to drive around mostly in single occupancy vehicles that are gas powered, we will definitely not achieve those goals.
Yeah. So let's end our conversation with what makes you hopeful? What do you see as sort of the next evolution in sustainable urban design? What are you kind of focused on as your biggest priority?
Maybe I'll jump in. I think broadly, for me, and I think this is probably true for Janet and many others, our ability to adaptively reutilize our existing infrastructures, our existing buildings, our existing spaces, to create something profound for residents is a really top priority, because we can do it. We can maintain the embodied carbon there. We don't have to blow a bunch of things up. We adapt it. People have a cohesive identity that's multi-generational. They remember what it was, what it is, and what it will be. And I think that really ties things together. I think a lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, what does that mean? You know it when you see it. And you know it when your child, who becomes an adult, remembers it. And there's a lived and shared experience around that. Those are the things that really define community in cities. And I think understanding that more is key. The second part to this too is then unlocking some of the really key financial tools that are out there to make that happen. People like Janet and others around the city have become much more adept at being able to target that funding and drawing it down and doing it in a range of different ways. We here in Detroit are blessed with a lot of really available patient capital, and our ability to tune in the local community development financial institutions, the CDFIs, into certain areas to actually have a pointed, targeted impact is something that you don't see in a lot of other cities. It is extremely robust, and I'm very excited and hopeful that will continue to grow and be increasingly strategic and impactful in its benefit.
Yeah, and I would say that I'm really get excited actually at that nexus between bringing new ideas together with sort of, I guess what I'd call the pace of trust, right? Like, it's easy to have a lot of great ideas. I always tell young planners, I said, if 50 years from now, somebody thinks one of your ideas was really great, you've been successful. It's hard, urban planning, right? And we can, it's very easy. I can point to a lot of decisions that have been made in the past that you're like, oh my God, what were they thinking? And you have to put yourself often in their shoes to be like, okay, well, this is what they were thinking. So let me check my own thinking, right? So, but we do need to change and grow, and things are always changing and growing, right? So how do you take those new ideas and marry them with the people who you're actually, doing them for and working with, and it really, at the end of the day, a project has to move forward sort of at that pace of trust. Now, that pace of trust doesn't have to always be completely linear. Sometimes it makes big jumps, right? I call that alignment. When that alignment happens, big things can happen. And you see it. And, sometimes people can very easily say, oh my God, the stuff you're talking about, it's huge, it's expensive, we'll never have the money. But look around, it's happened, and it's happened in other cities, and it's happening even right now. Places that didn't have transportation before, and transportation systems, and all of a sudden they've got them. So I get really excited about that alignment and building that alignment, right? And how do we get things to align? Because I have seen it personally happen. When that alignment happens, all of a sudden cities make jumps, and they move forward, and things that you didn't think could ever happen all of a sudden can start to happen. But that takes a lot of communication, building trust, working with people. We not only was there for a long time not necessarily trust between the city and its citizens, but there certainly wasn't trust between the city and its regional partners, right? Which was a huge thing for mobility. Speaking to what Dan talked about, Detroit, even Wayne County can't do mobility often by itself. We need it's a regional thing, mobility, right? So, having trust with some of the other counties and the fact that some of that is changing and that there's more conversation, these things are game changers, right? So that we're both talking to the people, but we're also talking to the region. And then, how does that alignment come about where we're all of a sudden able to take advantage of some of the funding and then, make some things happen that people really want to see happen.
Well, what a great way to wrap up our conversation with the speed of trust and alignment. Those are good things to end on. Janet and Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on the Green Stream.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on SBN-Detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.